Alright, y'all, so today I wanted to do a very quick review of Season 10 of Smallville, the final season of the one of the more long-running superhero shows ever made, the finale, if you will. Did it disappoint, or did I enjoy the final season of Smallville? So it's been a long journey with me on this channel reviewing Smallville stuff, and like I said, it's been a very long series, and I was kind of excited to see it finally end. I mean, 10 seasons is a lot for anyone to watch on a TV show, and Superman in general is one of my favorite characters of all time. So did it stick the landing, if you will? I will say this, and I've heard a lot of people complain about certain elements of this final season over the years and the memes and stuff. I think some of it is warranted, some of it isn't. And I personally, overall, to kind of give you my initial opinions before, of course, like all my other videos, I'm going to give you my pros, my cons, and my overall opinions. But for my initial thoughts on Season 10 of Smallville, I enjoyed it. I thought this was a pretty decent ending to one of the best superhero shows I've ever seen. And honestly, it's pretty safe to say that. And while I don't think Smallville's perfect, and it's been very bumpy in terms of certain elements and characters and episodes, and there are, like I said before, some really bad episodes a part of this show, I think this is a pretty good ending to the series. So, I didn't have any huge complaints. Now, there were certain elements of it that definitely could have been done better. There are also certain episodes in this season, like every other season of Smallville, that are just bad. It's a huge mix here and there about it, but I think overall it sticks to landing. So let's get into my pros first. So the big plot point of this season, like the last season it was Zod, the previous season was Doomsday, and now for season 10, it's Darkseid. Yes, sir, Darkseid is a force of nature, and he's the final antagonist of Smallville. Now, when I was watching it, I felt like, at least to me, it felt like to me, I was like, well, this is a little too early to introduce Darkseid. But as more and more I was thinking about it and how it was done in the show, I felt like, to me, it felt more natural. Especially compared to other seasons, like, I always still feel like Doomsday should not have been in Smallville. That was way too early for a character like that to show up, and it makes no sense. Zod, okay, maybe. Darkseid, I would say sure, maybe, but the way it's done, he doesn't really show up in physical form throughout this whole series. He's more of an overarching villain that's like a force of nature. He pushes other people, and other people serve his will from behind the scenes, and he's, like I said, a force of nature. He's the darkness, so to speak. And I feel like that made sense. Now, maybe if Darkseid came in physical form and, he's actually a physical presence, maybe it wouldn't work as well. And I know that might be a little bit of a hot take, but I feel like the way it was done in the show, it made sense. And like I said, it leaves room for future adventures where, this version of Superman can fight Darkseid again, but in physical form. But Clark by then had mastered all his abilities. So it's pretty cool stuff. There's also the overarching plot revolving around Lex, where we find out that Lex had been secretly cloning himself to, I guess, kind of create the perfect version of himself to revive himself. And there's also other side plots going on. This force of nature I mentioned with Darkseid is kind of pushing people to create a vigilante task force. And that's kind of a whole thing. Slade Wilson is here, aka Deathstroke, but in a way different version and not like in the comics. Also, the Suicide Squad is here, but also not really like in the movies and stuff. They are mainly kind of anti-heroes here, but they're not really that huge of a presence. Kind of weird, though, and I feel like that was an element building up from the last season, and I'll get into some of my cons, their storyline doesn't really go anywhere. But another thing with Lex, there's been clones of Lex. We kind of get a clone of Lex that's played by the same actor who played him as young Lex in previous seasons of Smallville, which was actually a really nice touch. But we find out he's a clone mixed with Clark and Lex's DNA and basically becomes Superboy at the end of it. I thought it was a really nice evolution of that character, and that was really well done. And there's a total Superman element to it as well. Lionel Luthor kind of has a brief return, if you will, in this season, but he's from a parallel world where, Clark was found by Lionel. He becomes the evil version of Superman, Ultraman, and, it's from a much darker reality. And honestly, it's one of the best episodes in the series where Clark gets accidentally thrown into their world. I think 2 times in this series, but he talks with his father who's still alive in that world. And it's just, like I said, one of the best written scenes in this entire show. Convinces his own father from an alternate universe not to kill him and to believe in him. Just a great, really just great stuff. And, the rest of this season is basically just groundwork for Clark becoming Superman. He has a slightly new costume this season. He talks about creating a new alter ego, an identity. He wears glasses as Clark Kent. And, of course, eventually Martha Kent creates a brand new costume for him that Jor-El keeps safe. Obviously, the iconic Superman suit. And, there's a lot of really cool stuff. I'm going to kind of get into my other positives with this season. I really enjoyed some of the new revelations with characters. Tess Mercer, a character that I think started out pretty rocky, in my opinion, but by the end of the series is one of my favorite characters. Like, honestly, quite underrated in Smallville. We find out that she was a secret daughter of Lionel. So she is a Luthor, but is not like Lex at all and has embraced a good path. And it's such a sad thing that she dies by the end of the series, but I thought it was a really cool revelation, and it made a lot of sense, considering the fact that she was just kind of given everything in Season 8. There's also a pretty cool episode where Clark goes back to Smallville, goes to Smallville High with Lois, and while I would have wished some other characters would have made appearances, like, I know it's probably unrealistic, but it would have been cool if maybe Pete would have showed up one more time, or maybe even Lana, even though I don't think that would have happened, and they would have had to explain that. That would have been pretty cool. It was kind of crazy. The Bugman from, I think, Season 1 shows up in that episode and talks to Clark, and it was just a really nice episode. I thought it was really cool. And there's kind of also really other interesting episodes as well. There's, like I said, the whole thing with the VRA. That's pretty interesting stuff. There's some pretty goofy episodes as well. Hawkman passes away in this one, and that was a really well done episode. I thought that was pretty well done. And, the whole thing with Lois and Clark in this season. Now, Lois at the beginning doesn't know that Clark is the Blur, but it seems like heavily hinted that she knows, and then eventually Clark tells her, and then they kind of jump into a relationship, and then by the end, like, they're kind of not married, but they kind of are. It's a little bit weird. It's like the marriage, like, didn't get completed, but, they are basically a strong couple by the end. They're basically Lois and Clark as we know them in the main Superman continuity, so that's pretty cool stuff. And, there's a lot of really cool stuff. I thought some of the dark side elements were pretty well done. Granny Goodness is here, Desaad. They all show up in, like, human form, and they're basically, branding people, preparing people for the darkness. And I thought that aspect of it was pretty good. I really liked how Granny Goodness was done here. That was really cool. Even though I do prefer the comic book versions of Desaad, decent stuff. Now I'm going to kind of get into the, I guess, more controversial aspects of this season, mainly the finale. How was the finale? Did it, end the show well? My thoughts on it. I will say this. I enjoyed the finale. Now, going into it, I heard some negative things about how the show ended. Particularly the fact that Tom Welling, you don't really get to see him in the Superman outfit. Now, I kind of mentioned this, I think, in some of my other Smallville videos, but Tom Welling had a weird contract where whenever he signed on to do Smallville, he didn't want to wear the tights, he didn't want to be seen in the tights and have fights and stuff like that. It was literally a part of his contract. And that was something that was kind of beholden the showrunners and writers throughout its entire run. Even though they would try their best to get around it, like the outfit that Clark wears at the beginning of this season has the Superman symbol and everything, but it's obviously not the Superman suit. Now, I do think that there would have been a version of this season where maybe he actually embraced it and wore the suit. That would have been pretty cool, but I'm honestly fine with the fact that at the very end he finally wears it. And it's not like, like I said, going to the finale, I had low expectations for it. I thought that he was only going to wear it at the very end. He wears it, and we actually get to see him do stuff, but it's like with some dodgy CGI, and I do get some of the complaints. I wish we got to see a shot, at least one shot, of Tom Welling just in full costume. We get a full good look at him in the costume. And, I get the complaints. But at the same time, I also think the way it was done, it was fine. I wasn't disappointed. Him, running out of the building, opening up his shirt, revealing the symbol, that's amazing. Honestly, like maybe I'm just kind of justifying it a little bit. Yeah, I think there would have been nice if they included a shot of him in the full suit, but at least we got to see him a little bit in the Superman suit at all. And he finally embraces his destiny. I also like the fact that by the end of the series, he learns to fly, which is not, it's presented as a more of a psychological issue because Clark has so much self-doubt and so much baggage with him that prevented him from flying. But by the end, he's fully accepted his destiny. Jor-El even says he's proud of him, and he finally has complete confidence in himself, and he flies, which, honestly, brilliant. Like, I love that creative decision. Such a really cool thing. And I like the finale for the most part. I mean, he wears the suit. Jonathan shows up in, like, visions throughout the whole thing. Martha shows up. And the scenes between, like I said, there's some fantastic scenes. Jonathan Kidd shows up throughout this whole season, mainly as an illusions. But it's really well done. It's well executed. It's a great ending to the show. The only thing I could really complain about is, I guess, how the whole situation with Darkseid's planet, because Darkseid's planet, Apocalypse, comes to Earth. And the people who are branded, I guess, somehow are willing this into existence, and I guess it's going to cause the collapse of Earth. Superman finally accepts his destiny, shows up, and moves the planet. Just literally moves it. And, I mean, like I said, it's more believable than, like, Superman Returns, where in that movie, he, like, moves an entire island of the one material that severely weakens him, which I think was well done in this series, in terms of its relation to Clark. I don't know, like I said, I know Superman's strong, but you have to remember, too, this is a young Superman. Can a young Superman move an entire planet? I don't know. That, like I said, it's kind of weird. Like, people complain about the fact that Superman wasn't shown in full suit night and day with Tom Welling in it. I do get the complaints of that, but I do think that at least we get to see him in the suit kind of doing stuff, and we get the cool shot at the end with him. I think, like I said before, him moving an entire planet is just a little bit weird. Like, I'm just kind of like, I know Superman's strong, but can a young Superman do that? I don't know. But yeah, I thought the finale was pretty decent. I thought it wrapped everything up. Lex coming back, too, was amazing. I love that. I mean, I kind of knew that Lex Luthor, the actor who played him, was going to come back, but it was really great, and I really enjoyed how it was done. There was the controversial decision that, basically, if you don't know, Tess basically puts something in, and Lex kills his own, sister, Tess. She dies, but releases a toxin that would wipe Lex's memories pretty much completely. He will forget about Clark and everything like that. And basically it just sets the stage for the typical comic relationship of Lex Luthor and Superman. Because obviously you probably couldn't do a storyline after this that was like the original comics. Because obviously in this series, Lex knows, Clark is Superman. And I get it. Like, I know that this was probably would have to be done. It just, to me, I'm a little bit more mixed on that. Just because, like I said, there was so much work and development put in the Lex, and now it's just all completely wiped away. I don't know. Like I said, it's a little bit of an uneasy feeling. But then again, like I said, the writers had written the show up to this point to present it that way. I don't really know how they could have fixed it in a really well-done way. But, Other than that, to kind of continue with the positives, I love the fact that Lex Luthor's back. I love the the whole relationship between Clark and Lois. It's honestly the best it's ever been in any of the other seasons. It was really well done. I do like the finale for the most part. I do like some of the dark side stuff. It was pretty cool. Chloe's also back in this season, and there's some pretty good scenes with her. And I think even though she doesn't really appear in most of the series, and I'll kind of get into my cons later with her, it's pretty well done. And also, Martha Kent coming back was pretty great as well. And she kind of appears sporadically alongside Jonathan throughout this whole season. And, yeah, pretty cool stuff. Also, Supergirl, I believe, returns in this, which was cool, even though, I'm going to kind of get into my cons. I wish that she showed up more. Now, I'm going to kind of, like I said before, I'm going to get into my cons now. For my cons on Season 10, I will say that this season had a lot to juggle. There was a lot of characters, a lot of episodes. It's hard to wrap up a series that had gone on as long as it did and have a perfect landing with all its characters. For example, Supergirl. Supergirl shows up in this series and is told by Jor-El that you got to do this and that. And, it kind of creates a very interesting dilemma. But then she's told at the very end, oh, well, you got to leave this planet because Clark's got to become his own guy, his destiny. I don't know how to feel about that, mate. I feel like there could have been a better way for her to leave the planet, or at least there could have been a better way for her to sideline herself away from Superman. And it's kind of an issue where they, to be honest with you, she probably shouldn't have come back at all in this final season. In my opinion, how I would have done it, she wouldn't have come back at all. And she would have showed up for the wedding and that was it. Because then there wouldn't be a whole thing with her being forced to leave and Clark could still become Superman. So I don't know how to feel about that. Chloe as well is an interesting character in this series, but she kind of appears sporadically. And some of the reasons for her leaving are just very one-note and loose. And you can just tell that apparently there was some kind of dispute behind the scenes with her and Pei that resulted in her leaving the show a couple times early. And it was, like I said before, quite disappointing. I wish that Chloe had more to do with this season, even though she arguably is the most gray area character in this. And also I'm going to kind of go into my more weaker stuff in terms of the weaker episodes, because Smallville obviously has some weak episodes throughout all of its seasons. There's a pretty weird episode where Clark shows up, Lois, they kind of get sidelined on that journey that they're doing, and basically they end up in a very much religious Amish town that's powered by blue kryptonite. And I gotta be honest here, it was a bizarre episode. That's one of the weaker episodes of this season. You could have cut that episode out and maybe reworked a few things. Didn't need to be here. I wasn't a big fan of that one. The Suicide Squad. They don't really get a lot to do in this season. They show up, they're kind of like anti-heroes, and they just bizarrely disappear. They should have been, like I said before, there should have been a few episodes revolving their story arc, in my opinion, especially considering the fact that other subplots were continued. So, it's, like I said before, kind of weird stuff. And, I'm trying to think of other weird episodes that were kind of weird. The Blue Beetle one. Now, I did like Booster Gold in the series, and I almost forgot to mention, yes, Booster Gold appears in Smallville. I liked him, I liked the actor, the suit looks decent, but then they introduced Blue Beetle. Now, I get it, Booster Gold and the original Blue Beetle are from the comics. That being said, the version of Blue Beetle here is like, it's kind of like an Iron Man armor. And some of the CGI is really dodgy for him. And I personally prefer the comics, and they eventually made a 2023 movie, which I think was way better than this version of the Blue Beetle. So I don't think his appearance was that great, even though he's one of my favorite DC characters. And I also think the CGI was much more dodgy. I think every time Darkseid shows up, the CGI kind of takes a nosedive in terms of quality. And the ending had some mixed effects, in my opinion. Some of the CGI in this whole season was hit and miss. And you can tell that they wanted to do more stuff, they wanted a bigger budget, but they probably couldn't afford it because the ratings were declining from what I've heard. So they couldn't exactly do it. They had to work with what they had. But regardless, I do think some of the effects are dodgy, and I wanted to mention them. But yeah, so that's some of my cons for this season. I know I've been probably rambling. Let's kind of quickly wrap this up. My overall opinions of season 10 of Smallville. It was a pretty good finale to the series. It doesn't exactly land the mark entirely. There are some weak episodes, even horrible episodes, some weird stuff, some dodgy effects, but I think a lot of the characters are kind of come to a nice conclusion here. And in general, like I said before, the main character, Clark himself, his journey to finally accepting the destiny that he has before him, finally becoming Superman at the very end of the series, a series that was all about the backstory of Superman, his time in Smallville. Well, I guess also the half of it should be Metropolis, the show, but his time as Metropolis, not as Metropolis, but in Metropolis, setting up the events and the motivations and the reasoning why he becomes the hero Superman. And I think this season did a decent job of setting up Superman. And, by the end of the show, he's Superman. And I think it was a really cool finale to, honestly, a really good and great DC show. I think this was overall a pretty great show. I have no complaints. I might do a longer video talking about the series as a whole. But yeah, I really enjoy season 10. It was a good finale. And Smallville as a whole is honestly one of the best DC shows ever made. I wasn't disappointed. I think that even though despite all the rough spots and weird storylines and honestly mixed seasons, I wasn't disappointed. I think honestly the quality in the show was mostly pretty good. And honestly, it was a really solid and a really good adaptation of Superman's origins. So yeah, love it. All right, so that's my quick review of Smallville Season 10. Hopefully you all have a good day, and peace, y'all.